Greg, Curt, what's happening?
That's what this interview is going to be? What's happening with Greg? I want to hear that cracking sound that Curt made earlier before we press record when he opened his beverage, whatever it was.
I have to wait till I finish my current seltzer.
Okay.
Move on to seltzer number seltzer.
4. Is it already summer where you are,
Curt?
Curt? Curt's in Richmond. It's summer here. I'm in Tucson. It's definitely summer. It's like in the 90s. I just got back from Bloomington where it is definitely not in the 90s, and it was snowing. And it was gray, and there was wind, and Deerhoof just recorded our next record.
Really? Right there at the secretly Canadian headquarters?
The former secretly Canadian headquarters that got turned into a recording studio called Russian Recording. You would have liked it, Curt, because Curt is one of a handful of people that I know that can read and understand Russian. And there were so many Soviet collectible Soviet microphones and outboard gear and like things that were like only 10 of them were ever made, and they were only made for the government and stuff like that. And this guy Mike has been collecting them, for years, and then recording unwitting ensembles in front of them.
So he's somebody who would be willing to talk to me about the ANS machine.
What's
the ANS synthesizer? Machine? It's the early Soviet era synthesizer that was named for Alexander Nikolaevich Scriabin.
Okay.
But
I did play a Soviet synthesizer on this record a few times.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
With keys?
Yeah, with keys and a million knobs, and every knob had had what it does, but in Russian, in Cyrillic alphabet, I had to guess. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but the Cyrillic alphabet, if you're used to reading a Roman alphabet, can now and again be rather confusing. The R's look like P's, and the N looks like a W or something.
You recorded that record and now you're back in Tucson? Is that where you live?
Yeah, that's where I live. Do
you ever see anyone from the Melvins there wandering around on the streets?
No, somebody told me that Buzz lives either in Tucson or near Tucson. I don't know. I think it's all lies.
Well, you might be lying to us.
Yeah. I'm not actually
here. Curt, you're in Richmond?
Yeah, Richmond.
I like Richmond a lot. How's it feeling over there in Richmond these days?
It's a great place to live, but I shouldn't
Seems like spring started.
Yeah, but I think it's gonna be back in the 40s next week. Okay. We had a really cold winter. People were comparing it to the last time we had real winters, consistently, which is the 1970s.
Right.
And I mean, it was cold, more like a northeastern feeling. So everybody feels due for some warm weather, and we're getting it now. But I think it's a false spring for sure, but we'll take it.
I know, but who's going to tell the trees and the plants and the flowers?
Yeah. They must be used to getting burned by now by the false springs.
April Fools.
Squeezing their buds out.
It's every year. They are just ready to pop, and then they just get smacked with freezing weather. It's so sad. It's just the tragedy. It's
poor plants.
Everything.
I can't wait to talk about your new record, but I want to know how you two know each other.
You want me to tell the story,
retell
Greg?
The ancient narrative from 100 years ago. There's a moment not long after... Deerhoof had an album called The Runners 4. That would have been 2005. And at some point, in the following couple years, I receive a cold email message that, in the years since I've learned to ignore. From a total stranger.
Who got in before the deadline.
Saying he was in Downbeat magazine because he won an award for his arrangement of Spirit Ditties of No Tone, which was a Deerhoof song on what was then our latest record. And he'd made an arrangement for big band, jazz orchestra. saxophones, trombones, trumpets, bass drum, piano. And, it was like way longer than the original song. And I listened to it many times and struggled to hear any relationship to the original composition, and was immediately impressed. It was very sophisticated. And that's how we met. But that's not how we met, because we didn't meet.
Okay.
We kept in touch for maybe a few more emails passed.
Yeah, we kept in touch.
Between us.
We kept in touch, but I didn't actually meet you till we were both living in New York City, in Brooklyn somewhere.
Yeah. Ran into you at maybe Death by Audio or one of those clubs that was there.
Really?
On Kent. Yeah.
That's better than, I think the way I met Greg was at Deerhoof at hotmail.com 20 years ago. And I probably didn't have anything to offer. You offered a beautiful piece of music. I was probably like, hey, it's Joe Plummer. Can I get on the guest list?
Your band had that T-shirt on the back that said "Jazzy, enjoy," and we still joke about that in Deerhoof. That's like a constant running thing, especially between me and Satomi. We just say "Jazzy, enjoy."
Is there a comma between jazzy and enjoy?
No, there was like jazzy, and then enjoy was like a bullet point under the jazz.
Yes. The humor of me and Justin and Brant. And then how did your relationship bud after seeing each other at Death by Stereo?
We met in person, and I convinced Greg to give me some composition lessons. And following that, I had a sequence of tunes that I wanted to record with friends of mine who were also living in a very close radius in Brooklyn about 15 years ago.
Like Caroline Davis.
Yeah, Caroline and Aaron Dugan.
Yeah.
And we recorded a record at Figure 8 when that studio was just getting off the ground, and had a blast. And then years after that, we played a show or two between that, and now we recorded a work of classical music with Mikey Colton and Jonathan Gott. We recorded the American String Quartet of Antonin Dvorak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been released too. And at least following that, in the years following that, I wanted to do something else. I wouldn't say it's in a similar vein, but it is an arrangement of pre-existing canonical music. And the Bach canons presented themselves as good vehicles for us.
Before that, what has Bach meant to either of you? How influential has that been in your musical life? Greg, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I was in grade school, and I knew that I was into music. I started playing drums, but I'd taken some piano lessons, and at some point I realized that I was being pressured to investigate what's called classical music, and this was due to teachers I had in grade school, especially high school, and also due to my mom, who minored in music in college, and she was really into it, and she was listening to classical music all the time when I was growing up, and a lot of the records she had were, music of Bach, and what does it mean to me? I mean, it's like of all the sort of like pantheon of like Western classical music's greatest hits, over the centuries, Bach, I think, is probably the one who's been, submitted to the most radically wide range of answers to your question. People say it's everything from, well, it's so mathematical, to it's so emotional, to it's so religious, to it's so drunk, to it's so remote and perfect and inhuman, to it's so so personal and human and understandable. I think the thing for me that part of what I wanted to bring out on the few tracks that I did that were just MIDI arrangements where we didn't actually perform was that Bach is often considered, this sort of pinnacle of contrapuntal music in Western music history. Contrapuntal meaning counterpoint is like each voice in the music has the melody all at the same time. Everyone is doing a melody.
Yeah.
And in the case of these canons that Curt and I played, it's actually the same melody but delayed and maybe at a different pitch, starting on a different note. Sort of like a round, row your boat, etc. But as if you were starting on a different note. The second person started on a different note or whatever.
Yeah.
My hot take, my Bach hot take is that it's like, yeah, but what about the harmony? I think that Bach also was about chords, and I was taught my whole life that to listen to Bach as chords was an error on the listener's part, and that it was all about these lines. It was all about listening to the multiple melodies simultaneously. Perhaps as a side effect of the counterpoint, the amount of dissonance that occurs in this music is it's nonstop. And when I first started listening to classical music, I think my ears interpreted it as always being very friendly to the ears, kind of predictable, quite boring, very locked in, and sort of straitjacketed. And the more I listened to it, the more I realized that wasn't true. And so a lot of what I was trying to do with these MIDI things was slow it way down so that you could hear just how dissonant this music actually is, and kind of grinding, at a lot of times, and very, really pulls at the heartstrings. And I think a lot of that has to do with the dissonant harmony that sort of, it's always this bittersweet, maybe not always, but often. So yeah. In other words, I think that Bach, it was a time and place in which dissonance was something that always resolved, and that the idea of history was that, it was always progressing, and that we were always going towards perfection, and that there was going to be an afterlife, a beautiful afterlife where all conflict disappeared, and that the dissonance represented tension and represented conflict and sin before it had been, atoned for. And every time I listen to his music, I guess I feel that, it's a little like Spielberg making like Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List or something like that. It's like, oh, look at all of the war crimes. Look at all of how barbaric human beings can be. Look how violent World War II was. And yet, you just picture Spielberg in the director's chair watching something blow up, because he or some blood trickle out, or somebody like, writhing in agony as they've just been shot, and the pleasure he must feel when he sees the scene go perfectly. You see what I'm saying? There's a sadism involved. And I'm saying the same thing is true of Bach. I think he was one of the best purveyors of sin, in all of music history. He loves those dissonances. Yeah. He loves the conflict. He loves the strife and the pain that's in there. And nobody portrayed that. Maybe not nobody, but to me, that's partly what he means to me, is a portrayer of human suffering in an exquisitely delicious way.
Yeah. And Curt, where does Bach hit you? and the buns and the heart and the brain.
Everywhere. It's a total experience.
It is for me too.
Yeah.
True.
And I'm glad to hear that. It's as close to any notion of pure music that I can think of. Bouncing off what Greg said, when I listen to his greatly slowed down MIDI arrangements of the Brandenburg Concerto No. 5, I feel like I'm looking through a very, very high-powered microscope at the music itself, like an atomic physicist, and I can see the elemental building blocks of the music itself, and I can see the whole reflected in those little parts.
Mm-hmm.
I can experience the same kind of aesthetic satisfaction listening to the granular elements of the music, thanks to the technology that allows us to slow it down so much, and find that the cohesion is total.
I see. Yeah.
My reaction to hearing kind of Bach through the prism of Greg's creativity, and that is something that I've always felt when approaching his music. I always go to Bach in times of distress, personal or global, which is to say I'm almost always playing Bach. His music, his keyboard music, there's very little conveyed on it besides the notes themselves. He wrote before a time when composers felt obliged to be hyper-specific about the conditions in which they demanded the music be heard. So otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily feel free to repurpose the music as we have. I think that Bach gave us license to do so by his approach to music. And I recognize that as a church musician, as a survival strategy.
Oh, okay.
He was a church musician.
Mm-hmm.
He was constantly having to repurpose it for whatever the needs were on any given week of the liturgical year. And if you just look at what he did with his own music, you see a very practical person, a very practical sort of genius, a sort of unbounded creativity that is focused on day-to-day and week-to-week matters of daily reality. How many singers does he have? Is he going to have any instrumentalists available to him? What's the church season? What does the church calendar demand of him? So he's always mixing and matching, composing new material as necessary, repurposing old material. So he never put too many walls around his own compositions because they were all kind of part of the same life's work, whether they were written for keyboard or ensemble. And that to me is an ideal expression of the musical life. It's an ongoing exploration of the same material that he was drawn to, the same chord progressions. And I find that very grounding as a musician. And so to pay tribute to that by taking his canons and not changing a note of the canons themselves, merely highlighting through instrumentation what he wrote.
Right.
By transferring the bass lines to a synthesizer.
Yeah.
And then noticing how conducive they are to rhythm, to rhythmic accompaniment. It's just it was so obvious that this is something that he probably would have done if he had access to a drum set.
Right.
He would have added some drums to that great bass line that he wrote.
Right.
He was doing the same thing with continuo instruments. The whole Baroque practice of writing for continuo was a shorthand.
It's like the rhythm section
approach. Yeah, that's
century.
right.
Yeah.
You're not even writing everything out. Yeah, and that would be dropped by later composers and later generations because they had to exert control over that. They could not let the musicians use their own taste and good judgment to supply the singers or the solo instruments with the backup that they needed to really excel. So it felt like a very Bachian notion just to add drums to those great bass lines and then transfer the canon lines to another synthesizer, so that they could really sparkle and shine. Again, it really captures some kind of musical ideal to be able to use it in any and all settings. You can be a purist about it and it will sound great. You can be a iconoclast about it and it will sound great if you're if you know what you're doing.
Right.
So that's more or less what Bach means to me and why I think this project works.
Okay. Well, I'd like to play a little bit of Canon number 9. That is beautiful.
I missed the chance to plug your beautiful mix, Greg.
Yeah.
Great job.
No, you didn't.
Taking all of those words that I just spoke and realizing them in sound.
Yes, that's exactly it. Exemplified.
I like what you just said, Curt, about how much Bach was having to repurpose his own work in order to churn out music at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, his main job, for which he was most famous, was as a person who's writing a mass every single week, for his local Lutheran get-together, and the thing that comes to mind for me, it's like you say, he's practical. I feel like in 2026, the idea of a practical musician, the image that is sold to us as of a practical musician means someone who will turn to AI, to machine learning, to fill in the gaps, or to hey, write me a sort of like pretty sounding, kind of religious sounding, here's the lyrics of the section of the mass that I need. And it's like, well, I was able to come up with this melody, but I'm going to sing it into this machine and maybe it'll kind of fill it out a bit for me. And
AI church music is a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it exists. But what strikes me about Bach is, I mean, obviously, where we always go with the cliches, in the PBS specials is always that Bach was such a genius, a kind of superhuman, almost genius. A god. Yeah. And that's the only way that he was able to write so much music so quickly. And in fact, looking at his manuscripts, one can see, that it's sort of like nothing's scratched out, and it's like, the final piece he was working on right when he died, he was working on this thing called the Art of Fugue, and it's not finished. And in fact, the fugue he was working on, it just runs out, bar, 73. And it's like one of the lines goes into bar 74 and then that's it. And it's like you realize this is not him making a second draft of something that he wrote first. This is like, that's how far he got. And like, literally, he's writing every note for the first time, like as though he's just taking dictation from his mind, and just writing it down. But to me, of course, it means whatever, genius, it means talent, maybe it means inspiration, but especially what it means, and I think this relates to what Curt was saying, was trust. And so, one, he trusted his musicians to be able to improvise a little bit, and for him to be able to put shorthand sometimes into the part for the harpsichord player or the organ player. Two, he didn't put, the metronomes didn't exist in his day, but he didn't say it has to go exactly this tempo. And like you say about the keyboard music, it's like, well, you could play it on the clavichord, you could play it on the harpsichord, you could easily play it on the lute,
It depends on the acoustics.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just talking about instruments that
the tempo would depend on
day.
the acoustics.
Soon after his death, we had the invention of, and have ever since been cursed with the invention of the piano. And so then you can play the music on the piano, and it's like, and then you can go on from there. Agree. But I think also it's not just trust of the musician and openness, but it must be incredible trust of himself. Whereas the AI solution to quote unquote practicality is evidence of a lack of trust of one's own ingenuity and one's own fantasy, and one's own talent. Bach was forced into the opposite solution to his problem of having to write such a large volume of music in such a short span of time and do it over and over and over again. And that was that he trusted his instincts, or whether you call them instincts, impulses.
And he himself was regurgitating in a way his own influences, like composers like Pachelbel and Buxtehude and Frescobaldi. He was a sponge, absorbing all of that and then distributing it as needed. In the way that people might think that now you can only do that by relying on software or supercomputing.
Right.
Like, no, that's what it means to have influences and to proudly copy their music. Sorry to interrupt you, Greg. Go on.
I'm done.
Curt, I'd like to go back just real quick. It's a little bit technical, but you were mentioning how acoustics influence tempo.
Yes.
That's very interesting sounding to me. Can you explain it a little bit?
Well, he was a paid consultant for not just for organ building, but for the acoustics of sacred cathedrals and chapels and palaces, princely residences. People would bring him in to make recommendations on how to improve the acoustics of interior spaces. So he was very attuned to acoustics. But I do know that as a classically trained musician, one bit of wisdom that I learned, breaking myself, trying to learn how to play this stuff with great teachers. And one of them told me that your tempo should always be determined by the acoustics of the room you're playing. It makes no sense to show off how fast you can play a piece in a room where the notes are just going to get lost in the acoustics. Mm-hmm. Conversely, if you're playing in a very intimate room where the sound hits the audience very direct, slower tempos might not be as effective.
Right.
And you can get away with faster beat rate. That's not the way to say it, but you can get away with that, and you should do it because it's more brilliant sounding and it brings a whole new aspect to the piece to play it. Just as Greg discovered that you can work with these things when they're really, really slow and find new things. You can also, as Glenn Gould showed us, you can find new possibilities by playing these things super fast.
Yeah. But
only under the right conditions. You would never want to do that except on a certain instrument and a certain acoustic. So that was what I was getting at. But again, these are practical things that musicians know. Musicians have to be responsive to life. We have to be ourselves the ultimate arbiters of what comes into us through what our stimuli are, and then how we send it back into the world as musical art. We make those calls because only a human can do it with sensitivity and wisdom that can direct it squarely at other humans. There's no abstract. People think Bach is this ultimate abstract genius, but no, he wasn't. He was very day-to-day. And only in that day-to-day did he create works that are able to be analyzed in an abstract sense and held up as timeless works. But yeah, it was the product of somebody who figured out their business very early in life and then just reproduced it, just like Deerhoof makes albums.
That's right.
Deerhoof is always making albums. They never slow down. They're always working, and they're consistently great. So, Greg, you can speak to that. I think you can speak to that work ethic of an artist, especially of a musical artist, where you're singing for your dinner, right? How did the expression go? You have to keep creating.
I do think that Lutherans, Protestants in general and Lutherans in particular, have cursed us all, with several centuries sense of the quote unquote Protestant work ethic and the idea that making things. It's amazing how compatible it is with a capitalist philosophy that's being forced on everyone. And I struggle with it all the time because it's like there's part of me that does want to keep making things. And it's like, and it's not just Deerhoof. I want to do a side project with Curt, and I want to do other stuff. But I don't, part of me stops before saying that it's for the sake of, because productivity is itself inherently good. I actually think that the only way that our species will survive is if we become a bit less productive. I think we're all working too hard, and it's that's what the solution to the climate chaos that we were alluding to at the beginning of the pod. The solution to that is what we briefly saw when everybody stayed home, for a few months. It's like suddenly the air cleared, the animals came back out, and it's like I do think that this sort of like self-flagellating philosophy of push yourself, hustle, is somewhat forced upon us by our economic system. But the economic system, part of the propaganda of this economic system is that we hold up people like J.S. Bach, who were so industrious, and serve as some kind of model. Anyway, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I don't know how many people in this podcast have ever opened for the Red Hot Chili Peppers in a 20,000 seat hockey arena, but wow. We had to slow the tempos down and you could not hear a thing, it was like no details. I mean, within seconds, I realized why arena rock is the way it is, whereas I was always mystified listening to the radio. I'm like, why would anyone want to play like that? But then you get into an arena and start playing. It's like, man, like this audience is bored, like they are not comprehending. They probably aren't even hearing, most of what we're even doing up here. We got to make bold strokes, we got to slow the tempo down. We got to make everything big. And maybe one of them will, bother to look up from their phone for long enough to like boo or throw a rotten tomato or something.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, then you disappoint Flea.
Flea liked it, and he never learned the lesson. He plays fast in every song, fast and busy.
That's right. He's got a lot of notes. Yeah, the first time I learned that lesson, I remember exactly where it was. It was in Portland, Oregon, at the Aladdin Theater. Which
the
Aladdin
Theater.
Crazy. I loved playing there, but it has a wild slapback. And I was playing with Black Heart Procession, and the notes are stretched out so far, and we had to stretch them out further, and they were like, "Wait, no,
exactly. That's the tendency."
And I was in the back corner, the only one hearing the slapback. And so I moved my drums forward so me and Toby could play together. But that's kind of why I was so interested in that idea. How did you? It's kind of two-pronged question. How did you prepare for recording this, and did you just track it all live, or most? I mean, I know you did the MIDI part,
not counting MIDI nonsense.
Yeah, it's a great question. I sent Greg the score of just the canons from the Goldberg variations, because obviously, I mean, Greg knew them as well as me, if not better.
No.
And so but I condensed them into a shareable document that was contained just the canons.
What he means is that there's this long piece called the Goldberg Variations, in which Bach was supplied with a theme by someone named Goldberg. And he wrote a kind of a long piece. Normally it takes like at least half an hour to play. But every third variation is in the form of a canon. And each canon is at a different distance, a different interval between the two pitches.
Numerically ascending.
Yeah, exactly. And so what Curt did is like weed out 2/3 of the piece and just keep the canons and say these are really good canons that are worth, just doing on their own.
The pop numbers.
Yeah, right. And you find that the canons, by just playing the canons in sequence, they sound like their own self-contained suite.
Right.
It's an amazing document, just the canons of the Goldberg variations, not even taking the theme into account on which they're based. The chord progression is the same underneath all of them. And as a kid, when I would listen to the Goldberg variations, my ears would perk up so much during the canons, because I still to this day don't understand how you write them that well. They sound just as pleasing as the other variations, which were not, where he didn't put that kind of restriction on himself, where the melodies had to be written in canon. But they are just there as these incredible examples of extreme creative self-limitation. So back to the preparation for the recording session, I'd sent Greg a PDF of the canons, and my own preparation. I didn't want Greg to have to prepare too much, because we did not rehearse. We were not able to rehearse. We met the day after the music festival to do this, and one day, and that was all we had. So I spent time leading up to the session writing some material that we could possibly use as transitional material between canons, and introductory kind of vamps that would be fun to play, fun ways of getting into them. Never changing, keeping the music. Once the music starts, it's like there's a frame around it and it's very, very clear. But as a suite, I was thinking of it more as a suite that we could play, that really was just an homage to the canons of the Goldberg variations, with some additional material that hopefully very tastefully created to lead us from one to the next. When we finished that process, then we decided that we needed more material to make it a full-length album, and that's where Greg's MIDI compositions, MIDI arrangements came into the picture.
I mean, I was already playing with those MIDI things anyway, with no intention of ever turning it into a record. I was just doing it for fun, just because, I don't know. That's what That's what Greggy does to relax, I guess, you know. But yeah, as far as like recording,
I love the end of your solo record.
What's that?
Talk about the end of your solo record where the live instruments cut out and you're just left with incredible MIDI orchestrations.
Yeah, MIDI. Well, I can't afford to hire a real orchestra, so you know, yeah, it's fun. Like playing the you know, a notation program. You know, there are various notation programs you can get that you know, when you put in your quarter note and you put in your eighth note and whatever, you can assign it to different instruments and it will play back for you. And you can turn that into an instrument, really, you know, which is, I find kind of fun, you know, when I'm just alone and don't have, you know, playing the drums. I mean, you know, Joe, it's like playing the drums by yourself is kind of like, you know, not the greatest, you know. I mean, yeah. Curt, you've got access to an organ with multiple manuals and pedals and all this stuff. I mean, you sound like a whole group just by yourself, but I mean, drums is a little bit of an antisocial instrument and kind of blah, you know, to sit there and just play a rock beat all day or whatever. But like, so sometimes, you know, just for other musical entertainment, you know, I'll be messing around with this.
There's a great video, and I'm assuming there'll be more.
No, that's just one where Curt. That's the only one where Curt was like, "Somebody get your phone out. We should be taking a picture of this. You know, we're almost done. Somebody take a video." We should
have done it for all of them.
That was the only one.
We would have had to pay Jake
what Curt
double.
said is true. We never rehearsed it. It was the day after Big Ears. We were still in Knoxville. Curt was playing with Penny, and I was playing with Wadada Leo Smith. And we're like, let's stay an extra day and record this stuff. And, you know, we didn't rehearse. And, you know, each of the tracks, you know, were like maybe a second take, a first take, a third take. You know, we you know, maybe played them a couple times. But and sometimes it broke down, you know, if one of us goofed or whatever. But basically, you know, Curt was doing all the heavy lifting. He had practiced these you know, being able to play them flawlessly, you know, for months. You know, I just came in the last minute and just started playing whatever came to mind. I mean, you know, for all of Curt's claims about how tasteful everything is, you know, I mean, taste was not foremost in my mind. I was just like going totally on impulse and just free improv, you know. I mean, I was looking at it. I had the sheet up on the music stand, but basically, you know, I was just whatever came to me at the moment, you know, is what I played, and so I find it kind of humorous.
I can tell as a non-virtuoso of any instrument, but as a drummer, I can tell that you were in the recording. You know what I mean? Your head was
my head
there.
Was in there. It's fun, you know. Yeah,
beautiful. It really is a wonderful combination of what you guys did together.
That's sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, I should add a little bit more context. Speaking of being a practical musician, and you know, attending to day-to-day requirements. Years ago, I was asked to play for a holiday market in Richmond, Virginia. Like play outside, you know, in a kind of a repurposed parking lot. Loose
I've done that too. Busking
with holiday themed music, and I just couldn't bring myself to play the carols and the traditional stuff. And I thought, you know what would sound good out there? You know what the people would enjoy is some Bach, you know. And I was playing with a great percussionist, a friend of mine here in town, Ray Alvarez, and I said, Ray, what if we just did some Bach? I'll just set up the vamps, and you just do what you do. And then, you know, when we go in, when you start hearing the counterpoint and everything, just keep going. It's going to be fine. And watch my head for when it stops and then when it starts again. Yeah. So that was a very primitive version of what became Bach Artillerie. And actually, I shouldn't say primitive. It's later I refined the approach a little bit more and refined to the keyboard parts. But essentially, still kind of leaving it up to the drums to basically know where the major milestones are within, fundamentally, where does it stop, where does it start, and then maybe in some of the canons, maybe there's some some hits that we might want to catch, like if it was a jazz arrangement. And Greg, one thing that you do is you can play very, very free whilst keeping the form in your head and catching elements of the form just like a great jazz drummer, which makes it all possible. Otherwise, it certainly wouldn't have worked. It would have sounded pastiche, paint by numbers. So yeah, that was an essential part, was the freedom, but controlled freedom of the drum part. But yeah, the piece it actually emerged from necessity, just music to play for people. Thank God that there are still times when people just don't turn on the Sonos, Pandora, Spotify playlist, because humans can do so much. We can, if you actually challenge us to do something better than that, we can do better.
You're absolutely right, and you both have proved it. Have you any chance of doing this live? You gonna tour the world or anything with this?
We have a show. We have a show in LA, and it's kind of soon. It's April 22nd. So
at 2020.
Yeah,
Arts.
2220 Arts, which used to be the old bootleg in LA that got bought.
Nice. I like that place.
And is run by my friends Peter and Andrew. And they're putting us on.
Just same instrumentation or same personnel? So just you two?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
A month and a half between that, anything could happen,
Yeah, Flea might be there.
I imagine we'll make the most of our sound check.
So Bach Artillerie comes out on April 24th on Ernest Jenning, not plural, Jenning.
Ernest's
Records.
Jenning.
Yes,
one man, one last
so
name.
tempting to pluralize that. I'll say only one more time, this is a wonderful record. Thanks for making it. The world thanks you.
Thanks for having us on this cast. Yeah, this is cool.
I hope to see it. There's always a chance I'm in Los Angeles, so if I am, I'm going to bother you.
Well, there's
I'll
always a chance. You know what happens in Los Angeles. That's a dream of the city of where dreams are made. Where stars are born.
That's right.
And who knows?
That's right.
We may need to end up going on world tour once Los Angeles sees
I hope so. The Los Angeles.
I think Mr. Jenning would appreciate
Ernest Jenning is going to give 2 thumbs up.
All right. Well, Greg, it's great to see you. Curt, great to meet you.
Great to see
Hope
you,
to
Joe.
see you in
Thank
person.
you for having us.
All right. Take care of your bad selves.
Okay. Bye, guys.